All right, welcome to today's live stream. I am going to start sharing my screen and we'll get started. I know everyone is highly anticipating how we are going to crown the ultimate Halloween candy of 2024 using math. So my name is Megan Pites, and I'm the founder and CEO of Numerius Inc. and your spooktacular host for the next 30 minutes or so. And obviously, since it's Halloween, we should have some Halloween decorations up, etc. Feel free to post in the chat where you're signing in from and perhaps the Halloween candy that you voted for in our survey, or any predictions on whom you think the winner might be. While you do that, I wanted to start with a little background. I know not everyone here is necessarily from the US, but in the United States, trick-or-treating is a very big deal. Let me just share some quick facts. The roots of trick-or-treating go back more than 2,000 years to the ancient Celts. They celebrated a pagan festival on November 1st that marked the end of the harvest season. The night before, they believed the dead returned as ghosts, so they left food and wine on their doorsteps to appease them. And perhaps some of you want to do this on the call and wish that that was what Halloween still was, but alas, we are older now, and trick-or-treating is left for the children. But back in the day, you couldn't just show up on the doorstep and demand candy like you can today, right? You had to entertain for it. So in the Middle Ages, children would go door to door dressed in disguise on All Hallows Eve, singing, dancing, telling jokes, reciting poetry in exchange for food and wine and even money. It was the Irish and the Scottish immigrants who revived the tradition in 19th century America, turning it more or less into the trick-or-treating that we know today, where children go from house to house dressed in costume, saying trick-or-treat and receiving candy in exchange. And it's estimated that Americans will spend $3.5 billion on candy this Halloween, according to the National Retail Federation. You can look at the trend year over year. It's a slight dip from last year, but you can see it's only been growing since 2011. So which candies are consumers spending their money on? Well, according to candystore.com, who generously supplied the imagery in our survey, which you'll see in a little bit as well. But how we vote according to them is with our wallets, right? And the top most popular Halloween candies in the US in 2024, according to their data, are M&Ms, Reese's Cups, Sour Patch Kids, Skittles, Starburst, Hot Tamales, candy corn, Hershey's Kisses, Hershey's Mini Bars, and Butterfinger. You might be surprised to see M&Ms dethroning Reese's Cups for the top spot, or Sour Patch Kids climbing the ranks this year relative to last year. And of course, the controversial candy corn at number 7, finally getting the spotlight it deserves in 2024. But I know there's some folks who are probably watching who now think that I'm disgusting since I love candy corn. Yes, it's probably me buying all the candy corn, because the candystore.com actually does this by state. And you may or may not be surprised to know that I live in the state of Michigan, and our top 3 candies are Starburst, candy corn, and Butterfinger. I kid you not. So I'm probably driving the majority of sales of the candy corn. Some of you probably, again, think I'm gross. Candy corn is one of the most polarizing candies. that are offered during Halloween, but we'll see where it falls in our stack rank here in a minute. So I mentioned all of the rankings that I showed you so far come from sales data. But what if the top Halloween candy was based on people's preferences or their tastes instead of just sales, right? Imagine a Halloween where the candy that people loved the most would be crowned the winner, not just the ones that are purchased the most, right? Because let's be honest, if I'm buying candy for myself, I'm probably willing to spend a little bit more, maybe even buy a full-size bar, right? But if I'm thinking about the trick-or-treaters, God love them, but I'm probably not gonna buy full-size candy bars, and I might buy, kind of the value packs with some good stuff in it and some not so good stuff in it, right? But as market researchers, we're often tasked with determining which concept, message, benefit, claim, or more will do best in the market. And we don't have sales data on things that haven't come to market yet. So we do research to figure out what our clients should actually put on market. So we're going to take that perspective here, and we're going to test 60 different candies and see which one people would prefer to get if they were trick-or-treating. And we'll do this with adults because it's actually kind of hard to survey 6 to 10-year-olds. But I do have a small sample of teens in here, which I'll talk about in a minute. So you can see all the candies that we tested here. We have a wide variety of chocolate with and without nuts, some sour candies, some gummies, some hard candies, and everything in between. There may even be a few of you that have not heard of some of the candies that are on this screen. I mentioned the teenagers. I recently spoke at a STEM night at my old high school and was constantly hearing about how, oh, I don't know this one, but I think my mom eats it, or my mom and dad might eat this. But we'll come back to those high schoolers in a bit. For now, let's think through how we would plan to crown the ultimate Halloween candy if we're not going to look at sales data. Now, with 60 candies, right, I think we can all agree that doing a ranking question would probably be pretty difficult and quite laborious, right? Maybe you could look at this screen and quickly rank your top 5, but you certainly would struggle trying to rank all 60 of them, right? And maybe we don't just want to know what's best, but we also want to know what's worst, right? I'm sure there's some candy corn haters out there who would love to see candy corn at the very bottom so that they could prove to me that it is not a great alternative for trick-or-treating. So I want that full list of rankings all the way from number 1 down to number 60. So ranking as a regular method is probably out. The next option would be like a ratings grid, right? But we're talking about candy here, and what's not to love? Well, aside from candy corn, but let's play it out, right? Imagine you did a ratings type of a question. I'd have to imagine that your results might look a little bit like this, right? Say you're a chocolate lover, and all the chocolate candies that you're presented get a love it rating, and anything that's not chocolate gets a hate it rating. And now if I'm the researcher, or I'm trying to present to my family which candies we should buy for the trick-or-treaters, I have to go and say, well, we got to buy all the chocolates because I can't really tell which one they like the most, right? Because they all get ratings of 5s. But maybe you don't want to buy all of the chocolate candies. Maybe you only want to buy 4. Wouldn't it be great to know like which 1 or 2 or 3 of the chocolate candies are the best ones? With ratings data, it's not very discriminating, right? And we don't get a whole lot of differentiation. So we're stuck choosing between mean scores of a 4.72 and a 4.73, and which one is better, and is that difference significant? So it's usually too close to tell. So at Numerius, we would suggest a technique that many of you know that I love, but if you're not used to following me, perhaps this might be new to you. So there's a technique called MaxDiff. It's also known as best worst scaling, and it can be used for nearly anything. If you want to prioritize a set of features for your next product, or the messaging about your new offering, or uncovering the ultimate Halloween candy. And in a MaxDiff, the survey takers are usually shown between 2 to 6 items at a time, and they're asked to indicate which is best and which is worst, or some other relevant alternative. And we show them these combinations of items over and over again, showing a different set on every screen. And so in our MaxDiff, we tested 60 candies, and we showed 4 candies per screen, just like you're seeing here. And we did this over a total of 15 screens. So if you do the simple math, that means that everyone saw each candy once, right? 60 candies divided by 4 per screen equals 15. If you haven't taken the survey yet, feel free to punch on this QR code and up will pop the actual survey. Obviously, your results won't be incorporated into the final crowning. In just a few slides, we'll find out who that is, but you're welcome to take the survey. It's still available at the QR code here. You'll also at some point see a little QR code in the top of the screen as well, and that will allow you to download the deck that I'm walking through today, should that be something that you want to share with your friends and family or prove to them where your favorite candy was the ultimate candy, etc. All right, so some of you might be taking the survey. Others, let's take a deeper look at what we get from MaxDiff. So I mentioned we're asking best and worst on each screen, and we do this over and over again. And we really like this approach because with just 2 clicks on one screen, we learn so much about that individual respondent, right? This respondent was served up candy corn, Reese's peanut butter cups, Snickers, and Swedish fish. Now, that's kind of a hard one, right? For me, all of those look really good, but as I'm sure you've heard in the undertones, candy corn is my favorite. So this respondent, who looks eerily similar to myself, selected candy corn as best. And this respondent selected Swedish fish as worst because she tends to get them too stuck in her teeth. So just from those 2 clicks, we know that candy corn is better than the other 3. We know that Swedish fish is worse than all the 3. We really just don't know, does this respondent like Reese's peanut butter cups better than Snickers, or Snickers better than Reese's? And I honestly couldn't tell you. That depends on the day for me, which one I prefer. But we can ask this question over and over again and get so much data on the entire list of candies for each individual without boring them or risking them straight lining through those ratings grids, right? And since we have 60 candies and many, many different options on which candies are best and worst, we send our survey out to hundreds and even thousands of people. Today, we're going to talk through results from smaller subsets than thousands. We have a GenPop sample generated from our partners at PureSpectrum. And so there's 300 candy eaters that are distributed all across age groups, genders, regions, etc. So we'll assume that maybe they're the best representation of the true population of US candy consumers. Then I also mentioned the high schoolers. We're going to look at 61 of the 14 to 18-year-old females who attended STEM night for extra credit and were bamboozled into taking a survey so that they could get the candy that was on the table that I was providing as incentive. And the results are actually super interesting when you compare the teens to the GenPop. And then, of course, we have our robust sample of LinkedIn followers, likely many of you on this live stream today. So we collect the data and then we do a secret process, right? No, just kidding. Nothing is secret about MaxDiff. It's a regression model. It's technically a multinomial logit, if you want to get mathy to be exact. And we leverage a technique called hierarchical Bayesian regression so that we can get preferences for each individual for each of the 60 candies without having to ask everyone about every possible pair of candies or ask them to rank the full 60 list. Happy to dive more into this, but since it's Halloween, I figured you'll get enough fright from the trick-or-treating tonight, so I'll leave the scary part and the mathematics out. But drum roll, please. The top candy of 2024, according to our 3 samples separately, because there is some disagreement, are, according to the GenPop, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups takes the top spot. According to girls 14 to 18, Twix is the overall winner. And according to the LinkedIn fan group, Kit Kat is number 1. Now, what's awesome about MaxDiff data is that what we're going to see on the next slide is not only do we know which one is number one, but we'll know how much better it is than number two, because we're going to get ratio scale data, which means that if I want to say that Reese's is 2 times as great as a Kit Kat, I would be able to say that if I see that in the data. Not surprisingly, those top couple of items are very, very close together. Okay, so according to the Gen Pop, the number one is Reese's Peanut Butter Cup, but Twix, Snickers, Kit Kat are very, very close behind. Okay, and then there's kind of like a dip after Milky Way, and you see another group of mostly chocolates. And then you see another group rounding out the top 20 that includes some Skittles and some peppermint patties and some Starburst, some not so fully chocolate candies. So that's according to the Gen Pop. According to girls 14 through 18, we see a lot of overlap in those top 10 mostly, except now this is where I think MaxDiff really proves its value, and the value of teasing out the, what we call mathematically, heterogeneity between groups, right? Girls 14 to 18 have very different preferences when it comes to those, 11 through 20 rankings than adults 18 and over. No surprise there, right? Sour Patch Kids, Skittles, Gold Bears, Starburst, Caramel Apple Pops, Lifesavers Gummies, Airheads, Swedish Fish, Nerds, like all of those make it in the top 20 with girls 14 through 18. And you don't see a whole lot of those in the adult population, right? Maybe Skittles and Starburst make the top 20. And then in the LinkedIn population, Sour Patch Kids actually does pretty well, and so do Skittles. And then Gold Bears kind of make it in, but not all of those others. Shout out to Jen Mancusi for the whatchamacallits being in the top 20. I know that is her favorite candy, and I know she's on the live stream with us today. So again, the data that you're seeing right next to the bar chart is ratio scaled. So any item that has a score of a 4 is twice as good as an item that has a score of a 2. But because we tested 60 candies, these items are like really close together, because across 60, we need those values to add up to 100. I'm going to show you the data in another look here in a minute, but let's just walk through the rank 21 to 40. We have, quite a bit of overlap here as well. But again, the teen girls are a little bit different, and our LinkedIn sample is a little bit closer to the Gen Pop sample as well in that sort of middle ranking. Okay, and then at the very end, bringing up the tail, right? Some pretty strong alignment on the ones that just are not going to make the cut, getting bought for Halloween candies. You've got Hot Tamales, Atomic Fireballs, Necco Wafers, Good and Plenty, and the Boston Baked Beans, pretty much kind of rounding out the bottom for all 3 of the sample groups. And there's a question coming in about, are these the average preference score? So yes, the MaxDiff model is creating a utility for every individual, and then we're taking we're rescaling that to 100, and then taking the average for every individual. So all 3 slides for every black bar, that will add up to 100. That's how we do the rescaling across all 3 subgroups. So that's why you're getting really small numbers here at the bottom, because we're trying to divide 100 by 60 items. But turns out, this seems to pass the sniff test. We've been doing this study, or I've been doing this study for like a handful of years. But we've kept the same list in 2023 as we had in 2024. So I can compare the MRX community, right? My LinkedIn sample from 2023 to 2024. And, good news is you guys are pretty consistent. Twix and Kit Kat just flopping from last year to this year, and Milky Way, Snickers, and Reese's Peanut Butter Cups kind of up there in the middle. And then Sour Patch Kids just making it in 24, but not on the list in 23. So perhaps I've got some younger followers this year who decided to participate than last year. On the bottom half of the 10 worst candies for the MRX community in 2023, Slowpoke, Baked Beans, the Fireball, the Necco Wafers, Sugar Daddy, Mary Jane's. Sad for these brands. A lot of them are older and more nostalgic. But the folks today are probably not going to be as excited to walk up to a house and get their trick or treat and see one of these candies. So if you haven't bought your candy for tonight yet, maybe avoid these 10 and your trick or treaters will be happy. But what else can we do with this data? So assuming that you're convinced that this technique is great, right? I think we saw really cool differences between the Gen Pop 18 plus and the 14 to 16-year-olds, even with small sample sizes. So this technique is really great, even with small sample sizes, because we're getting so much information from each individual. But if we're going to go through all that effort to build that whole mathematical model, well, what else could we do with the data? So one thing that we really like is anchoring the data. So the previous slides showed you the stack rank from best to worst, right? But we don't actually know if you want to eat all of those candies, right? Or if you want to eat just some of those candies, or maybe you don't want to eat any of these candies, right? Imagine you have a peanut allergy, right? Clearly you would choose those items as worst on every screen. But I don't know that because I'm just using the model to inform my preferences from other people and building it in aggregate and then looking at an average. And maybe those, peanut ones fall to the bottom for you, but they're at the top for others. But I want to reflect the fact that you would never eat an item with peanuts in it if you had a peanut allergy, right? And so in MaxDiff, because all the items are relative, we don't actually know which ones are good, which ones are bad. So you can simply add an extra question into your survey. It can be a multi-select, it can be a yes/no, it can be a 5-point grid. And you can ask this question about the entire list or a subset. Since we have 60 candies, we're going to ask it about a subset. And we're just going to say, like, hey, we want to understand from the list below, which of the following would you actually want to receive as a trick-or-treater? And you can select as many as you like. And you can choose a random subset or a smart subset. What we served up in our survey was a smart subset where we were pulling in a handful of items that you said best, a handful that you didn't choose as best or worst, and a handful that you chose as worst. So we could kind of try to find where that baseline or that anchor is. And this method is called the direct anchoring method, and it was introduced by Kevin Lattery in 2010. So highly recommend using this. But then all you have to do is tell the model what it means to be above the anchor or acceptable. So for us, it's anything that you selected in this follow-up question. And then we can transform the results into something that makes it look a little bit more reflective of actual purchase behavior. Okay, so now everything is anchored to this 100 value. Okay, so that's going to be the middle. Okay, and then anything above the 100 is a candy that group would actually want to receive as a trick-or-treater, and anything below 100 didn't have enough people who said that they wanted to receive it. Okay, and then these are still ratio scaled. So a 250 is, that's a bad number for me. 200 is twice as good as 100, and 50 is twice as bad as 100. What's interesting to me is that according to the girls 14 through 18, on average, only about, and I can't count on the fly, but it looks about 13 candies cross over that anchor, okay? Because maybe they're super healthy and they don't like dyes in their candies anymore, and who knows? Or a lot of them they really don't even know about or have never seen. So they have a much higher threshold. They are way pickier than the Gen Pop and LinkedIn, right? Because we don't see the anchor yet in the top 20. All of these candies are above the anchor. So for these groups, these people would actually be happy, most of them, right? It's in the averages, so some folks won't, but the majority of them would be happy receiving one of these candies as a trick-or-treater, okay? From there, we can see the anchor pop up for the Gen Pop and the folks on LinkedIn right around that number 21 candy. So after about 20 candies in the overall ranking, the rest of them, maybe not so much, okay? And then the girls 14 to 18, you start to see some really, really low scores here, meaning that the majority of them said that they would not really want to receive this candy as a trick-or-treater. And then at the very bottom of the list, you've got some really low numbers. So if you if you're testing a really long list and you want to show kind of a wider scale, having an anchor is really helpful, because now you can see we have values that go from as low as 2 to as high as 250. And that really teases apart the scale versus forcing everything to be rescaled within 100. And like I mentioned, 60 only goes into 100 so many times, right? 1.3 times on average. So it's really hard to see some of those differences with just the average scores. Here with the anchor scores, it's very easy to see the differences, okay? The stack rank remains mostly the same, but we're able to draw that line in the sand for that group. But I do want to mention, like, use the anchor with caution. I'm hoping that there's some researchers on the call who plan to use MaxDiff, who maybe have never heard about anchoring before. Now you're super excited, but you just have to remember, one, your questionnaire is now longer, right? I chose to use a subset because I didn't want to have people then go through the 60 candies again and select all, right? If you have a set of 10, maybe they can go through all of them, but maybe you don't want to do a ratings question because that'll also take longer. So, just think about the length that it does add to your survey. But what's worse is that we actually reintroduced the bias that we set out to avoid, right? I told you at the very beginning, we didn't want to do a rating scale because we didn't want everybody to say love it and hate it, okay? So we do a MaxDiff, best and worst, yay, we remove that scale bias. But then we introduced this anchoring question and we reintroduced that scale bias right in again, right? What you're seeing is some research on the right-hand side that shows that the threshold where that anchor falls is different based on country, okay? And so you can see that in India, we're going to have a much lower threshold, meaning a whole lot more items are going to be above the anchor, because this might be stereotypical, but I think people in India are very happy, right? I think if you do research in India, you tend to know that they rate things slightly higher, right? 9s and 10s, 4s and 5s, and they don't tend to use the lower end of the scale. So if you're using an anchor, you're going to see a lot more items above the anchor in India than, say, Germany. Not saying that they're unhappy group, but they tend to be a little bit harder to please sometimes in research, and they tend to use the middle and the lower end of the scale and maybe not so much the high end. So their threshold is going to be really high, meaning that there's going to be fewer items above the anchor. So you really just have to be careful when you introduce the anchor and you're doing global research. I'm going to talk about clustering on the data here in a second. But you also, if you do plan to cluster the data, want to make sure you cluster on the unanchored results and then look at the anchored results after that, right? Because if you cluster on the anchored data, you might see clusters of this group of people, everything's below the anchor. This group of people, some's above, some's below. And this group of people, everything's above the anchor. And that's not really helpful unless you're trying to find, massive concept acceptors or candy lovers. Then that might be helpful. But I think what we want to find in our data is different clusters of candies that people want to eat, right? So if you have an anchor, cluster on the non-anchored data, and then look at your results anchored, which is exactly what we did next. So we ran a clustering analysis on the MaxDiff data, and we looked at a bunch of different solutions, but the 3-segment solution spoke to me the most, I guess. And oddly enough, after digging into these a little bit further, I went up to Walmart.com and I looked at variety packs of candies. And sure enough, they literally have party packs almost perfectly aligned with the clusters that we found in our data. This might suggest that maybe Walmart is using MaxDiff and segmentation analysis to figure out, or maybe the manufacturers of Mars candies are using this type of data to figure out what to put in the variety packs. But there's a large cluster, 40% of the population, had Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, Twix, and Kit Kat in their top 3. And Reese's, really wins out with that 320. And then after that, Twix and Kit Kat. And for this group, 19 out of the 60 candies that are above the anchor, meaning that maybe not everything is great, but the 19 that were, were mostly chocolate, but this group will entertain some Skittles, some Sour Patch Kids, some Gold Bears. Then there's the next group, and these are the chocolate lovers. They make up about 35% of the population that we surveyed. And 24 out of the 60 candies that we tested were above the anchor, meaning that they would love to receive them tonight while trick-or-treating. But they really don't want anything but chocolate. The only ones that were above the anchor for these guys are basically all of the chocolate candies. And then there's a smaller group, the 26%, who are your Sour Patch Kids, your Gold Bears, the Skittles. I would gather the teens, 14 to 18, have a pretty high presence in this cluster based on the data that we saw previously. And they had 18 out of the 60 candies arrive above the anchor, but only 6 chocolate candies crossed the threshold for them. So they're kind of not necessarily chocolate avoiders, but they would probably choose a hard candy or a sour candy over another. So feel free to put in the chat which cluster you think you're a part of, and we can share. I'm probably, it really depends on the day, but I'm probably a Reese's and a Twix gal. Not gonna lie, looks like I'm kind of average along with the other 40% of the population. All right, what else can we do? So there's this other technique called TURF analysis, right? TURF stands for total unduplicated reach and frequency. And it's meant to help us determine the optimal combination of candies or messages or benefits or product features that would reach the most consumers, right? Allowing you to make sure that tonight when the trick-or-treaters come to your door, you have something for everyone. Okay, so in this example of the data, we are saying that you are reached if your individual score for the candy is above the anchor, meaning you said that, yes, I would love to receive this candy as a trick-or-treater. And 80% of the folks that we surveyed had Reese's peanut butter cups above the anchor. So if you haven't bought your Halloween candy for tonight, pretty much all you got to do is buy Reese's peanut butter cups and you're going to make about 80% of the trick-or-treaters happy, assuming the 18 plus results align with, 6 through 10-year-olds. Again, I didn't survey actual children here, just adults, but maybe there's a adult trick-or-treating party that we can throw in celebration of the ultimate Halloween candy. After the 80%, right? So 80% of people are reached with Reese's peanut butter cups. But 20% aren't, meaning that there's 20% of people who said no. Like if that candy is available, I actually wouldn't be happy. I wouldn't want to eat it. So what do they want to eat instead, right? So then of that remaining 20% who don't want Reese's peanut butter cups, perhaps they have a peanut allergy, the next best candy to add is Kit Kat. And you're going to take your reach from 80% to 90%. And then after that, the people that don't want Reese's cups or Kit Kat, you add a Milky Way. And then after that, the people that don't want those 3, you add Sour Patch Kids, right? Kind of makes sense based on what we saw in the data. And then below the reach is the R in TURF and the F is for frequency. So what you can see below is the cumulative reach as you add each of the candies, and we get to nearly reaching every single person with about 8 different candies. And then the frequency talks about how many people we're reaching. And it counts you twice if your item is above the anchor. Okay, so 80% of our sample equals 290 people of the 300 and however we surveyed. Okay, and then when we add the Kit Kat, we're getting 10% new people. But there's also people who like Reese's who also like Kit Kat. So we're not just getting another 29 people when we add the Kit Kat to the bin of our Halloween candy. We actually reach 573 people because people love candy, right? Or the frequency of which we make people happy is 573, which means that we're almost giving people 2 candies that they like on average. And then that bumps up to 840, to 974, to 1258, right? And so we love when these frequency numbers are really strong because that means that they'll have choices, right? If the Reese's run out, then great. A lot of them will still be happy with Kit Kat and so on, okay? So if this is, how you're going to plan, this is one way to think about making sure you have candy in your basket for everybody. But this one, this is just if the item is above the anchor. So we saw that a lot of items are above the anchor, right? About 20 or so on average. But what if we said, let's do this analysis, but just based on your number one candy? So based on the number one candy, and the majority of the sample is from the PureSpectrum sample, right? For whom Reese's Peanut Butter Cup was the ultimate Halloween candy. So that's the number one when we're trying to reach people based on their top choice. And then the number two remains Kit Kat. But we're not getting as many people as we were initially, because now we're saying, hey, we only reach you if it's your absolute first choice. Same with that frequency number, right? We're grabbing a new group of people. We're never doubling up because you only get one vote. There's actually a bunch of different ways that you can run turf analysis. It doesn't have to just be on MaxDiff scores. You can run it on multi-select data. You can run it on ranking data, rating data, counts data. You just have to tell the model what it means to be reached. And counts data is really helpful if you want true frequency, right? We could say, hey, of these 10 candies, how many are you actually going to buy for Halloween? And that person who wants to buy 5 Reese's Peanut Butter Cups gets more influence on the frequency than the person who's only going to buy 1. Okay. But there's some limitations to this, just like I talked about with anchored MaxDiff. I want to be very transparent. And so what we like to think about at Numerius is to consider adding weights to your data when you're looking at turf analysis, right? Because the person that shops for candy all the time is probably more valuable to me if I'm the company Mars, right? Than the person who maybe only buys candy once a year for Halloween, right? I want to derive my SKUs based on the people that are really shopping a lot. So I could add weights to my data to reflect that, or maybe based on consumption, right? If I'm going to consume a lot of candy tonight on Halloween, maybe I want to weight that data a little bit higher than the person who's, only going to eat a couple pieces of candy. In addition to that, consumer segments are seldom defined by one individual offering, right? Like a one size fits all is usually not going to work. So we need to make sure the entire product line is strong. And when we do that, we have to think about what we call overlap. So turf is going to help you build your product line or your candy offerings for trick-or-treating in terms of breadth, right? It's going to say, hey, these 8 candies will reach the widest audience. But we also want depth, right? Because if I only want to buy 3 bags of candy, then what if the favorite bag runs out? I want to make sure that trick-or-treater is going to have something that they want, right? If I were to buy Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, Sour Patch Kids, and, Necco wafers, which we saw fall to the bottom of the list of the ultimate ranking, right? If the Reese's Peanut Butter Cups are out, maybe some of them will be okay with Sour Patch Kids. But then once the Sour Patch Kids are out and all you have left is Necco wafers, you're going to have trick-or-treaters who look like this, right? Super sad. And, maybe they don't even want the Necco wafers, and maybe they walk away without anything. So the overlap is also a really important feature. If you want to get nerdy, we can talk about different packages. There's a package in R called A rules. It's about association rules, and it really helps you understand that depth. And so if you're actually doing this type of research on a SKU line or something in the real world, maybe you also want to look at overlap analysis and not just turf. But let's return to our Halloween candy and our data. And there's one more thing that we can do with these results. And because we built a model, we have probabilities coming in, right? What's the probability that you would select candy corn as best and Swedish fish as worst? Well, then I can actually simulate that behavior, right? So I saw in the turf analysis that Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, Kit Kat, Milky Way, and Sour Patch Kids really reached a lot of people. But when the trick-or-treater comes to your door, they only get to pick one, right? So now I can actually simulate what the trick-or-treaters might choose based on that subset. And now I can buy my candy relative to the proportion of people that might be coming to my door. Because of course, as a mathematician, that's exactly how I'm going to buy the candy for my trick-or-treaters tonight. And I'm going to make sure that I have 2 times as many Reese's cups as I do Kit Kats and Milky Ways, and those 2 times as much as I have Sour Patch Kids, because 13% based on the model will pick the Sour Patch Kids, 23% will pick the Milky Way, 22 the Kit Kat, and 42 the Reese's. So it looks like I'm going to buy 1 bag of Sour Patch, 2 bags of Milky Way, 2 bags of Kit Kat, and 4 bags of Reese's. And I'm going to feel pretty good about hopefully all of my trick-or-treaters being happy. But because I had that anchor, I can also actually simulate, well, will anybody be sad and like choose none of these, right? Because maybe of those 4 items, none of them were a candy that they would actually like. But the good news is with just these 4 candies, nearly all of my trick-or-treaters will be satisfied, assuming again that the Gen Pop reflects the 6 through, how old when do you stop trick-or-treating? 13, 15? I don't know. As long as you're in a costume, I'll give you candy. But it looks like 1 in 10 might not pick the candies. So maybe I add a 5th one just to make sure I make everybody happy. All right, so that is all that I have on the Ultimate Halloween Candy. There's a lot of other applications of MaxDiff. I tried to sprinkle them in throughout, but you can use this same method when messaging for a marketing campaign, for trying to prioritize your product roadmap, trying to create clusters of data. It's really great when you're trying to understand that stack rank of any list. It's usually, the sweet spot is 20 to 30 items, because we do want to show every item more than once. But in this Halloween Candy MaxDiff, we tested 60, and we just showed every item to every individual one time. It still builds a great model, but I don't get to tease apart some of those differences as well as if I had a shorter list with more observations. And the little word cloud on the right is just some words that if you hear them, you might think to yourself, oh, maybe we should do MaxDiff research in order to help us prioritize our roadmap or find which things are more important to our shoppers or our customers. And like I mentioned up front, I think it's great. I think it's better than ratings data because we get greater discrimination between the items, and we also get greater discrimination between people on the items. There's no scale bias, and you could see some examples that it looks good on mobile. And it's, ranking data is kind of impractical when you have more than 10 items. What do you report? The top 1, the top 2. You usually don't get any information on the bottom of the list. And so we could go back to whomever makes Necco wafers and atomic fireballs and Boston baked beans and maybe tell them, maybe don't sell those as much anymore and put your resources behind some of the other ones. And with rankings data, it's ordinal. You don't really know how much better Reese's Peanut Butter Cups is than Twix, right? Because you just know one is a 1 and one is a 2. Is that distance really big and you should just buy Reese's Peanut Butter Cups? Or is that distance really small and you should buy both, right? This is very important if you're trying to make business decisions, right? A rank of a 1 and a rank of a 2, if that rank 1 is a long-term strategy that's going to cost the business a lot of money, a lot of developer time, etc., wouldn't you want to know if it's a must-have, right? If it's 10 times better than the second ranked item, or if it's barely better than the second ranked item, and that second item is more like a sprint and something that you could do very easily with minimal resources. You'd probably want to choose that alternative, but you can't make those types of strategic decisions with ordinal data. There's a great article on the Quirks repository that I call out here from Brian Orm about how good is best worst scaling. So feel free to read that a little more. You can also snap the QR code in the top left of the screen that you're seeing right now and get access to this deck and share it with your friends and family. But if I go quickly back to the winners, in case anybody was here late, we'll show you that the ultimate Halloween candy of 2024 for the Gen Pop is Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. For girls 14 to 18 is Twix. And for the LinkedIn community, which is most important, of course, is Kit Kat. So at the end of the day, I strongly subscribe to the opinion that when you force people to make trade-offs, that's only when you can learn what they truly value. And MaxDiff is one of those techniques that's super great at that. So I'll hang on for thoughts and questions, assuming that I haven't bored you to death. but appreciate everybody attending. And hopefully there were no surprises. Hopefully you saw where your favorite candy was. Hopefully you've enjoyed my Halloween decos. And yeah, hope everybody has a great, happy